Hello, I'm David Boyd. I'm the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment, and I'm really delighted to be part of this video lecture series of the World Commission on Environmental Law. I want to share with you today the story of one of the most critical human rights of the 21st century, the right to live in a healthy and sustainable environment. You know, scientists estimate there are 100 billion planets in the Milky Way galaxy and more beyond in the universe. The Avengers movies suggest there may even be a multiverse. But despite the best efforts of generations of scientific geniuses, there is only one planet that we know supports life, Earth. This beautiful blue-green planet is a miracle filled with amazing natural wonders. And yet we take our planet for granted, and we have inflicted cataclysmic damage upon it. When I was born, the population was just 3 billion people. Today, we are almost 8 billion. During my lifetime, the global economy and greenhouse gas emissions have both tripled. We have created a climate emergency, a biodiversity crisis, pervasive pollution, and a surge in emerging infectious diseases of zoonotic origin, exemplified by this terrible COVID-19 pandemic. Yet all human rights ultimately depend on a healthy biosphere and a safe climate. Without functioning ecosystems, which depend on healthy biodiversity, there would be no clean air to breathe, no clean water to drink, no nutritious food to eat. It's remarkable to think that just a teaspoon of healthy soil contains billions of microorganisms, algae, bacteria, fungi, and more that feed plants and protect them from pest pathogens. Healthy ecosystems also regulate the Earth's climate, filter air and water, recycle nutrients, and mitigate the impacts of natural disasters. For example, we know that communities that are protected by healthy mangrove ecosystems are less likely to suffer deaths during cyclones. Among the human rights that are being threatened and violated by this global environmental crisis are the rights to life, health, food, water, an adequate standard of living, culture, and the right to a healthy environment. There are 7 million premature deaths every year because of air pollution, including hundreds of thousands of children under the age of 5. Contaminated water and toxic chemicals kill another 2 to 3 million people every year. And for decades, governments have signed treaties and made pledges to tackle climate change, pollution, and the decline of biodiversity. Most notably in 1992, with the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Convention on Biological Diversity. In retrospect, though, it's an embarrassing litany of bold rhetoric, timid action, and broken promises. Since 1992, natural gas use is up 82%. Oil use is up 36%. Natural gas use is up 68%. And coal use is up 68%. Overall, greenhouse gas emissions have risen more than 60%. In the 2015 Paris Agreement, nations of the world pledged to hold the increase in average global temperatures to 2 degrees and to strive to hold it to 1.5. Yet we're already at 1.1 degrees, and we're clearly not on track to meet those Paris targets. Similarly, none of the nature-saving targets agreed to by parties to the Biodiversity Convention in 2000 were met by 2010. And none of the 2010 Aichi biodiversity targets were achieved by 2020. So today, scientists' warnings have never been more clear or more dire. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, Indigenous peoples, and youth are all calling for rapid, systemic, and transformative changes to human society in order to address the global environmental crisis. And that's why there's such a vital and promising role for human rights. In recent centuries, rights have played a role as catalysts for societal transformations, including the abolition of slavery, progress towards equality for women, and the end of apartheid. Rights are being strategically and successfully employed by Indigenous peoples, LGBTQ+ persons, and people with disabilities. Now, it's never easy or simple or quick, but there can be no doubt that human rights have sparked positive, transformative changes. And human rights can help us overcome the Achilles heel of international environmental law, which is the absence of effective enforcement mechanisms and the resulting lack of accountability. For example, in 2019, the Supreme Court of the Netherlands in the Urgenda case ruled that the Dutch government had violated the rights of its citizens, for example, the right to life, under the European Convention on Human Rights, by failing to take sufficiently ambitious action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Acknowledging the scientific evidence of the severity of the climate crisis, the court ordered the government to make faster, deeper emissions cuts. And what was the government's response? The Netherlands is closing coal-fired power plants early, investing billions of euros in renewables, putting solar panels on the roof of every school in the Netherlands, speed limits and more. So what we learn from this case is that environmental law plus human rights equals accountability. And climate cases based on human rights are springing up all over the world. The Torres Strait Islanders filed a case against Australia with the UN Human Rights Committee, arguing that Australia's abysmal record on climate change violates their rights to life, health, and culture. Greta Thunberg and 15 other youths have filed a similar case before the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, asserting that inadequate climate action violates their rights. Even more powerful, though, in the context of the planetary environmental crisis, is the emergence and evolution of the right to live in a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. This state first began appearing in state constitutions in the United States as early as 1970. At the international level, this right was first recognized in the Stockholm Declaration that emerged from the first Global Environmental Summit in Sweden in 1972. Portugal and Spain were the first countries to include the right to a healthy environment in their constitutions, their highest and strongest laws, in 1976 and 1978, respectively. Today, this right enjoys constitutional protection in more than 100 countries. The right to a healthy environment is also found in the environmental laws of more than 100 countries. And this right is also now found in regional human rights treaties, beginning with the African Charter on Human and People's Rights in 1981, followed by the San Salvador Protocol to the American Convention on Human Rights in 1988, the Aarhus Convention in 1998, the Arab Charter in 2004, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations Declaration on Human Rights in 2012, and most recently, this year, the Escazú Agreement, covering nations in Latin America and the Caribbean. In total, over 80% of the UN's member states recognize the right to live in a healthy environment. That's 156 out of 193 countries. And people ask me, what is the right to a healthy environment? What does it mean? And my answer is that it's a bundle of both substantive and procedural rights. On the substantive side, it means the right to breathe clean air, have access to safe and sufficient water, healthy and sustainably produced food, a safe climate, healthy ecosystems and biodiversity, and non-toxic environments where people can live, work, study, and play. On the procedural side, it of course includes the right of access to information, public participation in environmental decision-making, and access to justice. And the right to a healthy environment is guided in its interpretation by key principles of human rights law and international environmental law, such as non-discrimination, non-regression, precaution, and prevention. People also ask me, does it really make a difference? And the answer is unequivocally yes. The right to a healthy environment, as research demonstrates, has served as a catalyst for stronger environmental laws and policies, increased implementation and enforcement of those laws and policies, higher levels of public participation, and most importantly, improved environmental outcomes. So countries that recognize the right to a healthy environment have reduced air pollution more quickly, reduced greenhouse gas emissions faster, delivered safe drinking water to a higher proportion of their populations, and overall perform better on comprehensive metrics of environmental performance. Let me offer a few concrete examples from around the world. Slovenia is a leading proponent of recognition of the right to a healthy environment. And about 15 years ago, Slovenia decided to get serious about waste management. Since that time, they have reduced the amount of waste going to landfill from 76% to 7%, making Slovenia the world leader in terms of recycling. And Slovenia has also increased the portion of its land protected in national parks and other protected areas to over 40% of its land. Costa Rica, similarly, a small country, but with an inspiring history of recognizing and implementing the right to a healthy environment. Since they did so, adding the right to a healthy environment to their constitution in 1994, Costa Rica has reversed the process of deforestation that had reduced forest cover in that country to less than 25%. And in the past 30 years, they've managed to increase forest cover so that it's now over 50%. Costa Rica generates over 98% of its electricity from renewable sources, including wind, solar, hydro, and geothermal. This is a country that protects almost 30% of its land. They have a carbon tax that pays farmers and indigenous peoples to conserve and restore land. Costa Rica has banned open pit mining, passed a law banning offshore oil and gas development, and they plan to be one of the first countries in the world to completely decarbonize their economy. In France, the right to a healthy environment was added to the constitution in 2004 as part of a powerful charter for the environment. And this was a catalyst for the world's first law prohibiting fracking. And it was a catalyst for the world's first law prohibiting all uses of all bee-killing pesticides called neonicotinoids. More recently, France passed a law prohibiting French companies from exporting pesticides that are not approved for use in France. And France is also one of the first countries in the world to explicitly recognize that everyone has the right to breathe clean air. In light of their leadership in recognizing and implementing the right to a healthy environment, it's not surprising that Costa Rica and France are the co-chairs of an inspiring new coalition called the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, which envisions employing a rights-based approach to protect 30% of the Earth's land and waters by the year 2030. Croatia is another country where the right to a healthy environment has had a critical role. In the words of Croatia's government, this right has contributed to protecting, conserving, and restoring biodiversity and healthy ecosystems by positioning nature high on the political agenda in Croatia. Conservation of nature is one of the highest values of our constitutional order, and Croatia has protected more than 38% of its land. In Argentina, thanks to the right to a healthy environment, billions of dollars have been invested in cleaning up and restoring the Matanza-Riachuelo watershed, formerly one of the most polluted places in South America. And this court order from 2008 has really improved the lives of millions of people living in the poorest parts of Buenos Aires. In Chile, the right to a healthy environment has prompted the beginnings of a cleanup of a notorious environmental sacrifice zone in the community of Quintero Puchuncavi. In Kenya, the right to a healthy environment helped block what would have been a disastrous coal-fired power project in Lamu on Kenya's east coast. In Mexico, the right to a healthy environment was used to block an ill-advised tourism development that would have destroyed a mangrove ecosystem. In the Philippines, the right to a healthy environment has been used to stop old-growth logging and to spark a massive cleanup and restoration of Manila Bay. One of my favorite stories comes from Colombia, where a group of 25 children and youth filed a lawsuit against their government, arguing that deforestation violated their right to a healthy environment. And in 2018, the Supreme Court of Colombia issued a globally important decision addressing both the climate emergency and the nature crisis. The Supreme Court of Colombia ordered the government to sit down with those children and with the country's leading scientists and to come up with a plan to end deforestation in the Colombian portion of the Amazon rainforest. Similarly, in Brazil, a decision is pending from the Supreme Court in a case that challenges the Bolsonaro government's climate policies to determine whether they are in fact consistent with the constitutional obligation to respect and protect people's right to live in a healthy environment. I'm currently participating in using my role as the UN Special Rapporteur in lawsuits from Indonesia to South Africa, where concerned citizens are arguing that chronic toxic air pollution violates their right to a healthy environment. There's just a remarkable number of positive examples. Last year, I presented a report to the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva describing more than 500 good practices in the recognition and implementation of the right to a healthy environment, drawn from more than 150 countries. Among my favorites are the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, Europe's Green Deal, and the Great Green Wall, a wildly ambitious project being undertaken by 21 African countries in the Sahel region, from Senegal in the west to Djibouti in the east. Billions of trees are being planted, millions of hectares of land are being restored, and water capture systems are being created, solar panels are being installed, and the Great Green Wall project will dramatically improve the lives of millions of people while restoring ecological health. Of course, it's also fair to say that the right to a healthy environment is not a magic wand that we can simply wave to deal with the world's environmental problems. For example, last year, it did not prevent the Supreme Court of Norway from upholding the government's decision to open new areas of the Arctic Ocean for petroleum exploration. It has not prevented Brazil's Bolsonaro government from reversing progress in reducing deforestation and industrial pollution. But given all of the evidence I have outlined, it is clearly a catalyst for positive changes. Unfortunately, however, the right to a healthy environment is not yet recognized for billions of people. 37 countries, including the United States, China, Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia, do not yet recognize this right, although there is reason to hope that it will soon be recognized in Canada and the United States. Also disappointing is the fact that this right has never been recognized at the global level. The United Nations has been debating recognition of the right to a healthy environment since the early 1990s. More than 100 million people have died preventable premature deaths because of environmental causes since those debates began. That's really an unfathomable statistic. But the good news is that there is unprecedented momentum today towards UN recognition of the right to a healthy environment. A group of states led by Costa Rica, Fiji, Finland, the Maldives, Monaco, Morocco, Slovenia, and Switzerland is committed to introducing a resolution, possibly as early as this year, but in 2022 at the latest. Last September, over 1,000 civil society organizations wrote to the Human Rights Council demanding urgent action to recognize this right. The UN Secretary General, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the head of the UN Environment Program, and the head of UNICEF have all called for the United Nations to recognize this right. And it has never been needed so badly. In the short term, the goal is universal recognition of the right to a healthy environment through resolutions of the Human Rights Council and the General Assembly. In the medium term, this right should be incorporated into a legally binding global instrument, such as the Global Pact for the Environment proposed by France, or a third international covenant. And ultimately, because it is so fundamental to human existence, well-being, and life, the right to a healthy environment should be added to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And my friends, even though UN resolutions are not legally binding, they do make a difference. In 2010, the United Nations recognized for the first time the human right to water. And since then, this right has been added to constitutions, incorporated into laws and policies, and most importantly, has sparked greater government action to deliver on the promise. In Botswana, the Court of Appeal invoked the UN resolution in 2011 in a case where it ordered the government to restore the indigenous Sans people access to a water source in a protected area. Here in Canada, a country that once opposed recognition of the right to water, the UN resolution caused a policy breakthrough. And since 2015, the Government of Canada has partnered with Indigenous communities to build safe drinking water infrastructure for 98 First Nations that were suffering under long-term boil water advisories. Universal recognition of the right to a healthy environment would acknowledge the reality that our lives, health, well-being, and dignity depend on the health of this beautiful planet. Humans are not separate from or superior to nature, but rather intimately, intricately woven into the fabric. We share DNA with every living being on this planet. And nature is not just a warehouse of resources for humans to exploit, but a community to which we are remarkably fortunate to belong. States must not only recognize, but implement the fundamental right to live in a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. That means using a rights-based approach to tackle the climate crisis, biodiversity conservation, air pollution, and the global water crisis. We must switch from fossil fuels to renewables as quickly as possible. We must respect the rights of indigenous peoples to the lands, waters, and species that sustain their cultures while protecting 30% of the world's lands and waters by 2030. We must create a circular economy where everything that humans make and use can be reused, recycled, or safely composted. With COVID-19, humanity is paying a truly horrible price for ignoring scientists' warnings. We must not make the same mistake again by ignoring climate scientists and ecologists. It is not yet too late to respond to the global environmental crisis, but time is running out. If we fail to employ a rights-based approach to protecting the biosphere, future generations will live in an ecologically impoverished world, deprived of nature's critical contributions to human well-being, ravaged by increasingly frequent pandemics, and riven by deepening environmental injustices. But if we place human rights and nature at the heart of the post-pandemic recovery, humans can attain a just and sustainable future in which everyone lives happy, healthy, and fulfilling lives in harmony with nature. Thank you all for everything you do to protect the people you love and the home planet that we all share. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Merci beaucoup. Muito obrigado.